This is Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app. Now, live from the Matt Black Kia Studios.
Oh, what a move!
Here's Josh Hennig.
Friday night, game night here on 97.3 ESPN. Josh Hennig hanging out with you. Got an hour show to go for a Friday. As Mike Gill mentioned, Brandon Robinson, ScoopB, NBA Insider, will join us coming up at 6:20. We'll get into what on earth happened down in Orlando. There's a lot of interesting reports coming out about who was mad at who was arguing at what. Apparently, one of the NBA players told Michelle Roberts to basically shut up, that he pays her salary. Also, go to 973ESPN.com right now, or the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. You can see the new list of potential candidates for the Sixers. Who are these candidates? Are any of them even legitimate options for the Sixers? I got some thoughts on that, and I know Brandon Robinson from ScoopB Radio, NBA Insider, will have those thoughts as well. Coming up just about 20 minutes from now, right here on 97.3 ESPN. The PlaySugarHouse.com text board is open, 609-403-0973. Speaking of NBA, a little breaking news popped up just as the guys were getting off the air. Porzingis, he had meniscus tear. He's out. You can hear the Clippers-Mavs game this Sunday right here on 97.3 ESPN. Coverage begins at 3 p.m. as sports end their pause and get back to action. And with sports getting back to action, we got to talk about it. But the Flyers back in action tomorrow night. You hear the game at 7 p.m. So they changed the time. Keep that in mind. 7 p.m., 97.3 ESPN and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. As I say that, the rain just plows down outside. Holy Toledo, hope you're all staying safe out there on the road. And let me tell you something. With the Flyers back, it's good to have them back because, let's be realistic, they're the best team in the city. The Sixers were a colossal disappointment this year. The Phillies, I'm not like Hunter over here. I'm not getting juiced up about Tommy Hunter every 5 seconds, but I still I have an appreciation for the Phillies winning, but I don't have a ton of faith they'll keep winning just yet. I think that they need to make another move at the deadline, maybe to get a little more pitching. You can never have enough pitching, in my opinion. And that's really where my mind is looking ahead to, because the NBA is going to be back tomorrow. The NHL is going to be back tomorrow. Baseball had a couple games last night. Phillies got a weekend series with the Braves. And all I keep thinking is, if you're going to be serious, if you're taking this 100% seriously, if you're the Phillies about making the playoffs, you got to be 100% all in. Not 95%, not 98%, 100%. Even the Flyers made deals at the deadline months ago. I know it seems like a very long time ago, February, but it did happen. They got Nate Thompson, they got Derek Grant, and you could argue that those two guys have really helped with the flexibility of Alain Vigneault's line changes. So it would only be smart for the Phillies to give Girardi more flexibility with his pitching staff. Versatility is something we hear a lot from the Philadelphia Eagles, right? About how, well, this guy can play multiple positions, and this guy has, versatility with positions and situations and schemes. So there's a theme here. If the Flyers made a trade and the Eagles believe in flexibility, I think the Phillies should maybe take some cues from their counterparts. Because let's be realistic. If this Phillies team makes the playoffs as currently constructed, I wouldn't be surprised if they get blasted out of the first round. After Aaron Nola and Wheeler, I don't have a ton of faith in the rest of the team. Sure, they got hitters, but who doesn't have hitters? You watch the majority of baseball, I feel like almost every team's got a bunch of good sluggers. I mean, if you've been around me and Hunter Brody enough, or at least followed us on Twitter, at Josh Hennig on Twitter, at Bros81 on Twitter, you know that both of us are kind of obsessed with Matt Chapman. Every team's got a hitter. I'm not worried about the Phillies' bats. I'm worried about their pitching staff. And when I watch the Flyers, and the thing I love what they do is they're not afraid to make changes. They're willing to make changes. They're going to go out there and try to do what it takes. The Eagles, they're not afraid to do what it takes. And the Phillies, I still have questions if Matt Klentak actually has the gumption, the spine, the wherewithal to put together a winning team. So when I look at a Phillies team, by the way, today is Jackie Robinson Day. I hope you all took my suggestion yesterday to go watch that movie 42 if you haven't. Well, maybe if the Phillies game gets a rain delay, you should go do that tonight. But still, the Phillies, I'm still waiting. I'm waiting to find out exactly what they're going to do. I want to know exactly how this team is going to approach this desire to go all in. Even Elton Brand. You may not be a fan of Elton Brand, but guess what? The guy's willing to go out there and do what it takes. He's shown you the willingness to make trades and go out and make signings. You may not like all of his trades and his signings, but he's willing to do it. And I still look at Klentak, and I feel like Bryce Harper was more of a John Middleton thing. JT Realmuto, well, if you don't re-sign him, it kind of feels like a bit of a waste, does it not? Zach Wheeler, he's been good for a few games, but it's more than a one-year deal. It's more than a 4-game starting deal, right? So I'm not 100% sold on this idea that the Phillies, when they say we're all in or we're serious about winning or any of that stuff, I'm just not bought in to this idea that until I see them do it, I just can't believe it. PlaySugarHouse.com text board is open 609-403-0973 to get on the conversation. 609-403-0973. We'll get more into the NBA. The roller coaster ride that was Wednesday afternoon through this morning with Brandon Robinson, NBA insider, ScoopB Radio, coming up at 6:20. As I was saying, with the Flyers coming back, if you haven't checked out their new schedule, you should do it at 973ESPN.com. One of the things that stood out to me with that schedule is when you look at the Flyers, they were going to have not one, but 2 back-to-backs in this playoff series, which, whether you asked me, Mike Gill, Hunter Brody, who actually played professional hockey, right? Pete Thompson, anybody here at 97.3 ESPN, we all would have told you that we weren't thrilled about that idea. You should never be thrilled about a team playing all kinds of back-to-backs. It's just a recipe for disaster. Well, now the schedule has changed. Game 3 Saturday, Game 4 Sunday, Game 5 would be Tuesday, Game 6 would be Thursday, 7 Saturday. So now it's only 1 back-to-back instead of 2. I'm not thrilled about it, but I'm okay with it. And part of the reason I'm okay with it is because sports taking a pause might have been a blessing in disguise for the Flyers. It might have been an opportunity for them to hit the reset button. You know, a lot of the NBA players have talked about how emotionally they were just drained because of being in the bubble, everything that's going on in the outside world, their disconnect from the outside world, and how all those things affected them. So you have to think hockey's unplugged from the rest of the world. They're in a bubble. They're isolated. You have to think it affects them too on some level, all this stuff. You know, Tuukka Rask didn't leave to go to attend to the health situation with his daughter for nothing. Obviously, he's worried about his family. And if you're separated from your family, you're probably going to be worried about them. So for the hockey players, this pause button, they didn't play for a couple days here. It might have been an opportunity for them to turn around and say, get some rest, recalibrate, refocus. Because after the first two games, it's a 1-1 series, but it feels like it's a 1-1 series by a little bit of luck. The Flyers have legitimately, in my opinion, only played about 3 good periods in the last 7 periods, okay? In the first game, 2 of the 3 periods, they were totally outplayed by the Islanders. And then the second game, they came out gangbusters in the first period. They were okay in the second period. They seemed to just fall over themselves in the third. And then they came out strong in the overtime, the fourth time over. So I'm talking about the second period in game 1, the first period in game 2, and the overtime in game 2. So to me, the Islanders have potentially been the better team for 4 of the 7 periods of this series already. So maybe there's a benefit for the Flyers to hit that pause button, hit the reset, and try to figure some things out. Try to recalibrate. Give everybody a breather. And you have a better goalie situation, in my opinion, than the Islanders do. I have a lot more faith in Carter Hart and Brian Elliott than Varlamov and Greiss. Because they've showed me that. The Islanders went on some nasty losing streaks this year. And I know some of us because of injuries, but you don't play as poorly as they did at times if there was not other issues. And I'm not saying the goaltenders played bad this year because they both had solid years. But there have been moments where I feel like single-handedly Carter Hart and Brian Elliott have kept this team in games. I think it's a huge positive for this team. And if you do decide to play Hart game 3 and Elliott game 4, I'm not exactly incredibly worried. Because to me, the bigger problem for the Flyers is not the goaltenders. The bigger problem is, can they stay aggressive and focused for all 3 periods? Because so far, they haven't done it. And maybe hitting that pause button for 2 days gave them opportunity to reset, recalibrate, refocus. We'll find out all together tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, right here on 97.3 ESPN. Don't forget the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. You can listen to the game for free on your phone, on your computer, anywhere you are. Flyers hockey, on your radio, on your phone, anywhere you want it, thanks to 97.3 ESPN. Game 3 tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Game 4, Sunday night, 8 p.m. Of course, you get all the action right here on 97.3 ESPN, all your coverage over at 97.3 ESPN.com. Of course, the Play Sugar House text board is open, 609-403-0973. Coming up about 6 minutes from now, we'll be joined by Brandon ScoopB Robinson to talk more about the NBA, Sixers head coach situation, and more. You want to find out the current list of potential candidates, people interested in the Sixers job, you can go see the full list right now at 97.3ESPN.com. A former coach's face is right there on the cover picture. But he ain't the only one. There's a growing list of potential names. Some of them may thrill you. Some of them may anger you. Some of them may confuse you. Go check it out, 97.3ESPN.com. Game night being brought to you by the New Jersey Department of Agriculture. Jersey Fresh Eggplant is great fried, baked, or grilled, and available in many varieties. Be sure to pick up Jersey Fresh Eggplant at your favorite market. Stay loyal to local. Buy Jersey Fresh. Josh Hennig, Game Night, 97.3 ESPN. Brandon ScoopB Robinson coming up next.
You're listening to Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app.
PlaySugarHouse.com text board is open, 609-403-0973. We're going to switch it back over to the NBA. In 1 week, we've had a lot going on in the league, so we're going to try to kind of encapsulate all of it. Also touch on what is going on with the Sixers head coaching situation with the one and only NBA insider. Follow him on Twitter at ScoopB. Brandon ScoopB Robinson, the ScoopB Radio podcast, joins us now on the Boardwalk kind of hotline here on 97.3 ESPN. How you doing, my friend?
Man, I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing well. And before we get to the Sixers stuff, because that stuff I feel like could just take away our entire lives if we talk about it for too long. But I wanted to touch on with you for the last, what feels like about 36 to 48 hours in the NBA bubble. And what I found incredibly interesting, because I've been reading a lot of the different accounts by people down there, whether it's Chris Haynes, Malika Andrews, all the people down there in the bubble, busting their tail, trying to, keep everybody updated on the outside of the bubble. And it feels like to me that the one thing that gets overlooked by a lot of the people who are talking about it, who are not in the bubble, people on the outside of the bubble, is there's a lot of raw emotion going on down there. And that raw emotion resulted in a lot of roller coaster of situations kind of all falling into each other. And that's really, to me, why the league had to pause. It wasn't just because the players wanted change. It was because the players are so far removed from the rest of the world that their emotions were just at such a high peak level that if they didn't hit the pause button, things really could have gone sideways and imploded into many different areas.
I would say you're right, but I'll also add that many didn't even want to be there. So I think when the Jacob Blake incident happened, what I can tell you is the Bucks felt a responsibility because they were the hometown team. That was where it happened in the state of Wisconsin. That they needed to show some solidarity and really show that things mattered the way that they did. And you got to credit George Hill for that process, because what I can tell you is the other teams that were on the slate to play that day, there was already talks of doing it. You saw the Toronto Raptors as well as the Boston Celtics who, were discussing that boycott. But the Bucks beat them to the punch, and it really made people sit and think. And is it a boycott? Is it a forfeiture? Like you've never in the history of man have you seen something like that. Maybe in a high school basketball game, but never in an NBA game that is in a bubble in Lakeland, Florida, the Orlando suburb. But what I do think is interesting is just how the chain of events went. It's interesting because John Lucas, who is very vocal to the old school and the new school. I spoke to him yesterday, and I said to him, "Man, I heard that you were a part-time Baptist preacher in your off days," and he fell out laughing. And he shared that just it was the leadership of. It took an OG to really get certain guys to listen and bring it home, because Chris Paul, who is the president, can only do so much and get people to listen. Kyle Korver was there, Andre Iguodala was there, but it takes an OG like Mr. Lucas to get the LeBron Jameses and the Kawhi Leonards to listen. But I do think that Jacob Blake did create a pause for people to sit back and think about what was really important. I called Kenny Smith last night, and Kenny expressed to me that he didn't just want to be a talking head by phone. He said to me, he was in solidarity with the players because if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And more specifically, he said that this is what that was about. They created attention by not playing, and it's got everybody talking. And NBA resumes on Saturday.
One of the things you and I have talked about before, and I feel it's important to bring up again, to me, part of player empowerment is more than just I have a thing I believe in, I have a cause. It's something about understanding that these are human beings with real human emotions. These are not characters in a video game. These are not robots just performing for everybody's entertainment. These are human beings that go through emotions. And there's been a lot of people who, in all sports this week, who have been breaking down emotionally because of things going on in the world outside of sports. So can you touch on a little bit about how important it is for people to start viewing these athletes more than just people playing a game, but as human beings?
It's interesting. I have a new show now with Heavy.com where I am a senior writer called Heavy with ScoopB, and you guys should check it out. This week I had Stephon Marbury on, two-time NBA All-Star, and also I had Jay Williams on of ESPN today. And Jay said something today that really stood out to me. it holds true. A lot of people think that athletes just shoot a ball, run, and they're robots, that they don't have feelings and that they don't think about things. And I actually think that when you're in a bubble, when you're not around with your families and you're with your basketball brother and some who you kind of know, some who you may not know, some who you may have grown up with a town over, you get to really know them as people, and then people start having conversations. You know, to me, it's no different than, you know, going to a National Association of Black Journalists convention and, you know, sitting next to Chris Haynes or sitting next to Stephen A. or sitting next to Mark Spears or Chris Broussard. Meeting of the minds. We don't work for the same companies, but we all know each other. And so I think that when a bunch of guys who are thinkers start talking, you start to come up with a reference. And to be honest with you, I actually think that the guys being in the bubble is actually a threat, because that's how you force real change. Not everybody playing armchair quarterback at home and talking about presupposes. I do think that Kyrie Irving is the bashing of Kyrie. The apology needs to be as loud as the bashing of Kyrie. And I think that in this case, as it relates to the bubble, everybody being around and having a conversation about what's going on, I think is a bigger threat, because now you have to talk about voting rights, which was something that, you know, was brought up today in a joint statement with the NBPA as well as the National Basketball Association. There are voting centers at all 30 NBA arenas, and they're forced to have that conversation. There are some things that LeBron James is right about as far as the voting stuff. Wherever you are in the voting line or what have you. I'm not here to talk about politics. I'm here to talk about sports. But if you want to see change, it does start within legislation. I can tell you that the Milwaukee Bucks did have the Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes on a conference call that day. And Mandela Barnes never told them to boycott. However, he did speak about legislation. He did talk about why that's important in making a change. Mandela Barnes has been a guest on the ScoopB Radio podcast. Make sure you check that out. He has a future in politics, but I do think that this is so much bigger than just a basketball. I think, to be honest with you, COVID has sparked thought-provoking things. And I think that's where the NBA's players are. But you don't have real change until you have a plan. And it seems that at first it was shaky, and now it seems as though they're starting to get some things in place, man.
Brandon ScoopB Robinson joining us here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at ScoopB. One more before we get to the Sixers stuff, on the bubble stuff. One of the things I was reading about were two specific players who have stepped up over the last 36 to 48 hours. One of them was Jaylen Brown, when he kind of put his foot down and, you know, according to reports, told everybody, you know, if we all leave this bubble, are we just going to go home to go hang out with our families and friends? Are we actually going to do something? And the other part was the guy was Chris Paul, how, you know, he stepped up on Pat Beverly when he was being disrespectful. And between Paul and Andre Iguodala, they seem to have to really work in overtime to, you know, get everybody back on the same page. Can you touch on both of those guys a little bit, Jaylen Brown and Chris Paul?
Well, Jaylen is a pretty upstanding guy. Jaylen is a guy that is very he has that astute look that players trust and respect and front office people do. I sat down with Jaylen back in December and talked about a wide range of different topics concerning the state of the Celtics, their playoff chances, ex-teammates, and more. And Jaylen answered honestly, candidly, and to be honest with you, a little too honest. And so for that conversation to take place, I did hear that was how it went in the bubble, and I did hear that Jaylen had that support. And by the same token, Chris Paul does too. I take it back to that Zoom conference call that he had with the Players Association, with the vice presidents. You had, Iguodala, CJ McCollum, Kyrie, Lillard was on that call, and a bunch of WNBA players as well. Dwight Howard was on there, a bunch of people. And Chris Paul, one of the things he was saying on the call is a lot of people just keeping it real and saying a lot of things. Those are recorded lines, and you don't know everybody that's on there. And Chris basically said, hey, you're not supposed to say everything on this call because you don't know who's on there. But I think what happens is people get alarmed by the fact that players are cursing, like the comment that Patrick Beverly made to Michelle Roberts about I pay your salary. Those are pretty common type of conversations that players have because they're keeping it real and they don't necessarily have a filter. In comparison, those conference calls or those Zoom calls with all 30 owners, it's more stoic. I sat down with, or rather I had an interview with Mark Cuban last month, the owner of Dallas Mavericks. And, Mark and I talked about his expectations for the bubble and what he thought about the jerseys. And he was in support of it. He was in support of Black Lives Matter. He was in support of all those different things. And he's one of the more hip owners, and he's going to say the most positive things. That may not be everybody's perspective in the National Basketball Association. I think you saw the stance that the New York Knicks took, and James Dolan, the owner there. They kind of a little bit more stoic in their approach with Black Lives Matter and just, support of all the different things that are going on. But I think Chris Paul is the vocal leader that those guys need for right now. But I do think that in the future, there are guys that have had to learn a lot of things on the fly. Bismack Biyombo of the Charlotte Hornets was on the ScoopB Radio podcast last month, and he talked about how much on-the-job training he really got in the spring during coming off for COVID, and how he and CJ McCollum and Chris Paul and Andre Iguodala and some of the other guys, there were 6 vice presidents. They had to put their brains together to try to figure out a way to find the most diplomatic and unilateral way about doing things in this process. So I think they're in great hands, the Players Association, and I'm looking forward to seeing what happens in the future. How much more on-the-job training certain guys are getting in the bubble, I think it's pretty amazing. What do they say? The NBA, where amazing happens?
Absolutely. Let's hit on the Sixers, which are no longer in the bubble for a variety of reasons. A lot of names are popping up for this job, and I want to get your thoughts on some of the names. I will start with a guy that you mentioned earlier. There are reports that John Lucas, a guy that you spoke to recently, would be interested in the Sixers job. And for the younger basketball fans who may not know, John Lucas was actually the Sixers coach in the 90s. So you're talking about a guy who's almost 20 years removed from already coaching in Philadelphia.
For sure. I didn't talk to Mr. Lucas about that, but, I know that Keith Pompey of the Inquirer today, a good dude, another guest on the ScoopB Radio podcast, did report that there is interest, that Jason Kidd has an interest in coaching the 76ers. I can tell you today that I got some information that Kidd is not only interested in the 76ers, he is also interested in the Brooklyn Nets, and he's interested in the Los Angeles Lakers should that job become available. I reported last month that we all know that he interviewed for the New York Knicks' coaching position, and I'm told one of the things the Knicks ultimately went with Tom Thibodeau, but I know that James Dolan wasn't completely sold on Tom Thibodeau at first. William Wesley and Leon Rose were pushing Tom Thibodeau hard. He actually would have been hired much sooner, and so Dolan wanted to bring back Mike Miller as well as Mike Woodson as the assistants. But what I'll say is it relates to Jason Kidd, I think he'd be a great fit for Ben Simmons if Ben Simmons does stay. If Embiid does stay, Elton Brand is the man. And I know that Elton has expressed that he wants to keep Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid together. But let's not act like we're holding Brett Brown accountable. I think now the microscope is going to be pointed at Joel Embiid and his conditioning and some of those other factors. And so I'm not here to bash, but I do think that someone like Jason Kidd, who is a player's coach, would fit. But I also think I'm told Jason would not necessarily take that position if those guys are not in Philadelphia. I think they're a hot team. I think that they have potential. I know Ty Lue has been mentioned over the last few days. I can tell you that the New Orleans Pelicans do want Ty Lue, and from what I'm told, it is Ty Lue's position to turn down in New Orleans. And the reports are that he does want about $7 million a year. But the Pelicans are a team that is very interested, and you also got to pay attention to the Pelicans as well as Brooklyn, because, all along the Nets were looking at Greg Popovich, Jason Kidd, and Ty Lue, but Greg Popovich is at the top of their list, as I reported back in March and April. So I think a lot of things point to what LA does in the offseason if they win the championship. But, Jason Kidd definitely was hired as a backup to Frank Vogel, and Frank Vogel has exceeded expectations this year. And I do think that that is why he's kind of stayed put. And why the New York job didn't happen. LeBron James wants Jason Kidd in Los Angeles. They've had desires of wanting to play with each other as teammates in the NBA and not just in the Olympics. So Jason Kidd is a person to pay attention to in Philadelphia, but there are some conditions there.
All right, so you said something, I'm going to hit the rewind button on here, about Ty Lue. You mentioned the dollar figure that he's looking for. Could that dollar figure eliminate certain jobs because those jobs may not want to pay him that number?
I'm not sure, but I think one thing that you can pay attention to is this. I think New Orleans will give him a longer shelf life in Philadelphia. And I'll use the perfect example of Jason Kidd. When Jason Kidd left the Brooklyn Nets some years back in 2014, he had about 3 or 4 years of ample time with a young Milwaukee Bucks team, and he ended up getting fired, and Mike Budenholzer replacing him. I think Ty Lue last year was looked at as not worth the dollar sign that he was looking for, and that's one of the reasons why the Lakers situation did not work out. Monty Williams was looked at as well. You see he's doing well in Phoenix, and Monty Williams has a long shelf life too because the Phoenix Suns are a young team. I think if Ty Lue were to come to Philadelphia, the expectations are high from the jump. I think Philly has the talent. They are missing a couple of things, but I think it's going to take a special coach to do it. I personally think Kenny Atkinson is a guy that the Sixers should be paying attention to. I know that the Chicago Bulls have interest in Kenny. He is on their list of people, as well as David Vanderpool, who's an associate head coach with the Minnesota Timberwolves, as well as Adrian Griffin. So I think Kenny Atkinson developed young talent. Championship, I don't know, because we've seen him develop a team like the Nets with D'Angelo Russell and more. But I do think that Ty Lue has a championship, and you have to put some respect on his name as it relates to what he's done. People always use the LeBron James analogy and the fact that he, won him, or basically LeBron handpicked him. Okay, so I think, I had a conversation with one of Ty Lue's former teammates a few months ago, and he talked about how even when Ty Lue was sitting at the end of the bench when he was a Laker, during the, when they played with Kobe, Shaq, and Phil Jackson, Ty Lue was just so engrossed in the game and was paying attention to little things. And it was no surprise that he ended up becoming a head coach in the NBA. If Ty Lue was brought into the fold and is the head coach of the Sixers, to me, it is a full circle moment. Because this is the same guy that was playing defense on Allen Iverson in the early 2000s, and Allen Iverson crossed him over and stepped over him. I think that's pretty funny, but at the same time, it's pretty ironic. But, I mean, anytime you have a team like the Sixers that has a Ben Simmons as well as a Joel Embiid, I think it's a coach's dream to have a point guard or a playmaker in Simmons, and a power forward, center, small forward hybrid in Joel Embiid that can do so many great things. So I think Philly is a treat, but you won't get Jason Kidd from what I'm hearing unless the two are together.
One more for you before I let you go, and I feel like another day you and I got to have a longer conversation about Ty Lue, because I'm so over the people who say, Ty Lue was only there because of LeBron, because there's a lot of evidence against that. But I got to ask you one more about the Sixers, and that's this. The perspective of different people who cover the team. You mentioned Keith Pompey. He was on 97.3 earlier this week. We had Yaron Weitzman on earlier this week. We had Bobby Marks on earlier this week. And we keep hearing the same thing from all of these people here, ScoopB, and that is they keep bringing up two things. The next head coach has to force the players to be more accountable. And the second thing we keep hearing again and again is the Sixers are looking for their next Steve Kerr. So with those two factors in mind, is there a group of the guys that we've talked about or we haven't talked about yet that fit those two elements best?
Yes. Phil Handy, who's an assistant coach with the Los Angeles Lakers.
Tell us more about him.
Phil Handy won 2 championships as an assistant coach with the Cleveland Cavaliers under Ty Lue, and then last year under Nick Nurse with Kawhi Leonard. Had the ear of the late Kobe Bryant. In fact, has the same birthday as Kobe Bryant. And in addition to that, LeBron James asked Phil to come back to LA. Phil left his job with the Raptors to take on a job with the Lakers this year. And his level of just attention to X's and O's is impeccable. I will tell you that Phil Handy is a guy that Kyrie Irving wants in Brooklyn. Will they hire him as a head coach? I think his name and his profile is still growing. Chris Webber spoke extensively about Phil Handy the other day on TNT, and he has his app called the 94-foot app that is training young hoopers. He's been very active during the pandemic before the bubble started, and he's just a guy that knows skills training. Was working extensively with DeMarcus Cousins earlier this year when he was still a Laker and getting well. And Phil is just a guy who is a great listener and who is a motivator, but he knows his basketball. He played in the 90s in the CBA. I'm talking like when Damon Jones and Earl Boykins played in the CBA. He's an Oakland area guy, did not quite make it to the NBA, just a lot of politics. But his imprint is still in the NBA, and has gone toe-to-toe with a lot of NBA legends that are there now. Had him on the ScoopB Radio podcast during the springtime, and I asked him if he had interest in being a head coach, and he says he gets that question all the time. He's not looking to leave Los Angeles, but at the same time, when it is his time, then he'll know it's his time. I think Phil Handy is a guy that should be getting more attention in the NBA and be referenced in head coach conversations. Because I think what's happening in the NBA right now is you're just recycling a lot of the same names.
Yes.
Yes. Mike D'Antoni. Yes. Yeah. Mike D'Antoni. I'm hearing if the Rockets don't pan out, and there's been talk about what his future in Houston will be, as well as the GM and Daryl Morey. I've heard talk about the Pelicans. It's like I have no problem with Mike D'Antoni. I think he's an okay coach, but you got to let these new guys act. Also, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about Mark Jackson. You talk about Steve Kerr. Steve Kerr benefited from Mark Jackson in Golden State. Say what you want, but Mark Jackson is a guy that should be mentioned in the conversation. I spoke to Mark a couple of weeks ago. He's upbeat. He's focusing on the bubble right now. But as he told me, if a conversation about coaching position comes along, he'll listen. He's been passed up a lot for a lot of reasons, not having to do with basketball. But I do think that Mark Jackson is a guy that the Sixers should be paying attention to as well.
I'll just say this before I let you go. I don't think it's a coincidence that the last 3 head coaches who have won NBA championships all had 0 NBA head coaching experience before they got their jobs and won rings. I don't think that's 100% a coincidence, but I'll just leave it at that. He's Brandon ScoopB Robinson. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at ScoopB, the ScoopB podcast, of course, the ScoopB Radio podcast, and of course, let the folks know again the things you're doing with Sands with the new video show.
Oh yeah, Heavy with ScoopB is a new initiative we started. Basically this month, we've had rapper Silk the Shocker, ESPN's Ryan Hollins was on. We had Stephon Marbury on, as well as Jay Williams. And I know that you told me that you like the fact that I had a certain Jalen on Heavy with ScoopB the other day, and you were right. Jalen is a guy that is worth talking to, and we talked a lot about Jalen Mills. By the way, Jalen Mills and I spoke a lot about the Eagles. You can check that out. Heavy with ScoopB. You can subscribe to Heavy's YouTube channel and check that out. Jalen Mills of the Eagles talked about a lot of different things. And on Monday, we will have NFL legend Marshall Faulk on Heavy with ScoopB. So a lot of things brewing coming down the pipe. You guys will be pleased. But also check out ScoopB Radio, 2.1 million streams. And check out my work at heavy.com and also at Basketball Society. A lot of different things moving around, but we're staying busy, Josh, as you are too.
Absolutely. My friend, I always appreciate you making the time. I think we covered a lot of bases today.
We did. I'll be back soon. I'll probably talk to you next week.
Probably. The way the world is going right now. Thank you, my friend.
My man, I'll talk to you soon.
And, of course, Brandon ScoopB Robinson, NBA Insider, like all guests appeared on the Boardwalk kind of hotline here on 97.3 ESPN. Game night here on 97.3 ESPN. I'm Josh Hennig. We'll check out the PlaySugarHouse.com text board. You heard a lot about Sixers head coaching candidates. Who do you want? 609-403-0973. Get on the conversation right here on 97.3 ESPN and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app, powered by First Bank of Sea Isle City.
Now, more Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app.
PlaySugarHouse.com text board is open, 609-403-0973. A lot of names here on these lists. Of course, you can check out the full article right now on 97.3ESPN.com or the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. So you heard ScoopB there. He had a lot of good things to say about Jason Kidd. And listen, Scoop knows a lot of stuff that a lot of people don't know about just because of, the nature of his, his inside information, who he talks to. But let me tell you something. I'm just not sold on this idea of Jason Kidd because he feels more like the guy who gets you ready than the guy who actually gets you over the hump. Because the 1 year in Brooklyn, I don't know what to do with that year. I mean, that year, it felt like there was no way to actually read anything from the year. I mean, that was the year that you have, Joe Johnson and Deron Williams and Brook Lopez and all these all-stars, but no superstar on the team, right? So what do I do? How do I gauge that? Yeah, okay, he has a good relationship with LeBron. Well, LeBron's got a good relationship with a lot of people. It doesn't mean every guy should be the right guy for Embiid and Simmons. So I don't know. I'm just not sold on the Jason Kidd idea like I am on Tyronn Lue, because I know Tyronn Lue is a guy that players around the league respect. And, if you want someone who's going to be tough on these guys, Ty Lue is probably going to be tough on these guys. Again, I'm not 100% sure about Jason Kidd. I'm not going to totally sell him off because I know that the situation he had in Brooklyn, in Milwaukee, were both situations that were just not ideal, right? Look at the other names out there. You have guys like Jay Wright. If you heard Darryl Reynolds, if you missed his conversation on the Sports Bash yesterday, go check it out at 97.3 ESPN.com. He thinks that Jay Wright's not going to leave Villanova. He doesn't think that Jay Wright, well, he said his quote was, Jay Wright likes the challenge, but his heart is at Villanova. So to me, that sounds like a guy who's probably not going to be available. Some other names out there, there are guys like Ime Udoka. I mean, he's a guy who's been a non-head coach, been a guy interviewed for a lot of jobs over the years. I'm so over the Mark Jackson talk. Look, I understand that that's a guy that people think very highly of, but there's a reason why that guy hasn't gotten a job since the Warriors job. Like, as Brendan ScoopB Robinson just said about 10 minutes ago, he said Mark Jackson laid the groundwork for Steve Kerr. Well, if that's on his resume, then why does nobody else want the guy? Why does that guy not get a ton of interviews every cycle? There's got to be something else going on there that we don't know about. I think it's not a coincidence that all these teams are interested in Ty Lue. I don't think it's a coincidence that Jason Kidd is a candidate for a lot of jobs. I don't think it's a coincidence that Ime Udoka is a candidate for a lot of jobs. I think that patterns tell us a lot of things in life. And I think that when it comes to some of these coaching candidates, I think that give me either the guy who's the up-and-coming guy who has a chance to, go big or go home, right? Kind of mentality. So you either go in that direction, in my opinion, or you go with a more known commodity. So I either want to see someone brand spanking new in here, whether it's, promoting Udoka, bringing in, somebody who is not experienced as being a head coach, or bringing a guy who's got a proven track record like a Ty Lue. I know Dave Yeager's a name out there. He's interesting. It'll be a lot of fun to evaluate and analyze and talk about all this stuff as we proceed through the offseason. I'm Josh Hennig. I'll be back on tomorrow, Sports Bash Saturday, for 1 hour after Billy Schwein in the locker room here on 97.3.